The azalea bushes were past their peak, but I hadn't had the heart to cut them back yet. There was something about the way they held on, petals browning at the edges but still stubbornly pink at the center, that felt too familiar to disturb. I was sitting on the back porch with my morning coffee, still in my robe, watching a cardinal work his way through the bird feeder, when my phone buzzed on the side table. It was a notification from Facebook. My daughter-in-law had tagged a photo. I almost didn't look. I'd learned to manage my expectations about what appeared in those little rectangles of other people's lives, but I tapped it anyway, the way you press a bruise to see if it still hurts. The photo was of a dining room table set for a celebration. Crystal glasses, white linen, a centerpiece of white peonies that must have cost someone a great deal of thought. Around the table sat my son, my daughter-in-law, her parents, her sister and her husband, and their 2 teenagers. Everyone was dressed in the kind of coordinated neutrals that don't happen by accident. The caption read, "Welcome home dinner for Dad's promotion. So grateful for this family." I counted the chairs. I counted the faces. Then I set my phone face down on the table and watched the cardinal for a long time without really seeing him. My son, Derek, had been promoted to regional director 3 weeks ago. I knew because he'd texted me a single line, "Got the promotion." Big changes ahead. I'd sent back a string of heart emojis and called twice. He hadn't answered either time. I picked the phone back up and looked at the photo again. There was a chair between Derek and his father-in-law. It held a sport coat draped over the back, casual and unplanned looking. But nothing in that photo was unplanned. I'd raised Derek. I knew how his mind worked when he was performing a version of himself for an audience. I put the phone in my robe pocket and went inside to make a second cup of coffee I didn't want. That was a Tuesday. By Thursday, I had made a decision. I didn't arrive at it the way people imagine, sudden and furious, some hot pivot of grief into action. I arrived at it the way I'd arrived at most of the important decisions in my life. Slowly, through a door that had been standing open for a long time, one I simply hadn't been willing to walk through. Derek was 41 years old. I had been walking toward that door since he was about 34. His father, Raymond, died in the spring of Derek's senior year of high school, pancreatic cancer, the kind that doesn't negotiate. Raymond was 61 days from diagnosis to burial, and I spent every one of those days at his side, while also getting Derek through AP exams, college applications, and the particular cruelty of being 17 and watching your father disappear. We held each other up that year in the way that people do when there's no other choice. Derek slept in our bed some nights, something he would have been mortified to admit to anyone, and I let him because I needed it as much as he did. Raymond left us the house, which I sold 2 years later, and a life insurance policy that I managed carefully. I lived on my teacher's salary and kept the insurance money in a separate account, barely touched, because I had a feeling it would matter more later than it did then. Derek got a full ride to the University of Georgia. He came home summers for a while, then less, then rarely. He met Cynthia at a work conference in Atlanta, 6 years after graduation. She was polished in a way that felt deliberate, the kind of woman who moves through rooms like she's already decided what she thinks of everyone in them. I genuinely tried, for years, to find the place where she and I could meet comfortably. I brought food when they moved into their first house. I remembered her birthday without being reminded. I asked about her work in ways that showed I'd listened the last time, but Cynthia had a family of her own that she seemed to prefer in every configuration, and Derek, gradually, began to organize himself around her preferences, the way a houseplant tilts toward the available light. The first time I really felt it was Thanksgiving, 5 years ago. They went to Cynthia's parents in Savannah. Fine, they'd come to me for Christmas, except that Christmas they had to be in Savannah because her father had had a minor health scare. And the next Thanksgiving was a trip, just the two of them, to Portugal. I began to understand that the calendar was a language, and I was not being spoken to in it. But I adapted. I took a part-time position at the public library on Tuesday and Thursday afternoons, which gave me something to look forward to. I joined a book club that met at a wine bar downtown, and made 2 friends there who had become real ones. I built a life that didn't require Derek to show up in it to function. I thought that was healthy. I thought I was being gracious. What I didn't understand yet was that gracious has a way of being mistaken for absent. About 3 years ago, the asks began. Not dramatic ones, nothing I could have pointed to and said, "This is the moment it changed." Small things at first. Could I co-sign a car loan because Derek's credit had taken a hit after they'd refinanced the house and opened too many accounts in the same quarter? Just temporary, just to help the numbers. I said yes. Could I wire a short-term bridge of $12,000 because there was a gap between the close date on a property they were flipping and the draw from their home equity line? Just a few weeks. He'd pay it back with interest. I said yes. Could I let them use my name on a rental property lease in Chattanooga while they waited for a prior lease judgment to age off Derek's record? It was complicated, he explained. The market was competitive. It was just paperwork. I said yes to that one too, though something in me tightened when I signed. He paid back 8 of the 12,000. The cosign on the car caused a flag on my own credit that took 14 months to resolve. The lease in Chattanooga, I later discovered, had resulted in a small claims action I was technically named in, which Cynthia's brother quietly settled without telling me about it, until the matter was already closed. Each time, there was a good reason. Each time, Derek was warm and grateful in a way that felt like the boy I remembered, the one who had draped himself over my shoulder at his father's graveside and let me hold his weight. That warmth was the thing that kept me from adding it all up, until the photo. After I saw it, I spent 2 days doing nothing except my regular routines with extra care, the way you move slowly when you suspect the ground may not be as solid as it looks. I watered my plants. I returned my library books. I had dinner with my friend Carol, who talked about her own son's new baby and didn't notice that I was quieter than usual. I let her talk. I needed to hear someone else's ordinary life going on around me. On the 3rd day, I called my attorney. Margaret Osei had been my attorney for 11 years, since I'd updated my will after Raymond died. She was a calm, precise woman who asked questions in a particular order that always made you feel that she'd already seen the thing you were describing from several angles and had arrived at a position before you finished speaking. I liked that about her. It meant I didn't have to explain the emotional architecture of the situation. I just had to give her the facts. I told her about the photo. I told her about the loans, the cosign, the lease. The $8,000 never returned. I told her about the insurance money from Raymond that I had kept in a long-term account, grown carefully over more than 2 decades, now sitting at just over $900,000. I told her that Derek was the sole beneficiary of that account, a decision I had made when he was 19 years old, when the idea of him being anything other than the boy who slept in my bed the night his father came home on hospice had seemed impossible. Margaret listened without interrupting. Then she said, "Do you want to change it?" I thought about the photo, the draped sport coat in the empty chair, the white peonies. "I want to understand my options first," I said. We talked for over an hour. She explained the account structure, which was a transfer on death arrangement rather than a trust, meaning I could update the beneficiary designation directly without court involvement. I could remove Derek, add someone else, split it, redirect it entirely to a charitable organization, whatever I chose. The account was mine. Raymond had left it to me, not to Derek. I had simply always intended it to eventually pass to Derek because that had once felt like an obvious and loving thing to do. I thanked her and told her I'd be in touch. That night I didn't sleep well, not because I was uncertain, but because I was certain in a way that felt heavier than I'd expected. Certainty, when it comes to people you love, is its own kind of grief. I called my niece the next morning. Her name is Brianna, and she is 32 years old, and she has been, without question, the most consistently present member of my family for the past decade. She calls me every Sunday without fail. She drove 6 hours when I had a minor procedure 2 years ago, and sat in the waiting room with a crossword puzzle and a thermos of good coffee, and didn't make a single comment about the inconvenience. When I had my roof replaced last spring, she helped me get 3 quotes and negotiate the lowest one down by another 8%. She doesn't have money, She works as an office manager for a small pediatric practice and is raising her daughter, Lily, alone after her marriage ended badly, in ways she doesn't like to discuss. She has never once asked me for anything except my time. I called her and asked if she could come for dinner that weekend. She said, "Of course. Do you want me to bring anything?" I said, "Just yourself." She arrived Saturday with Lily, who was 9 now, and had recently become very serious about birds, and who spent 20 minutes on my back porch with a pair of binoculars. I didn't know I had identifying things in the azalea bushes, while Brianna and I sat inside over pot roast and talked. I didn't tell her about the account. Not yet. I told her I was reconsidering some things and that she might be hearing from my attorney at some point. I told her she'd been a good niece and that I was proud of the life she was building. I said it plainly, without building up to it, the way I've learned to say important things since turning 63, directly and without a runway, because you don't always know how many chances you'll get. She looked at me for a moment, a little uncertain, and then she said, "Are you okay?" I told her I was better than I'd been in a while. That Sunday I called Margaret back and told her to begin the paperwork. The following Wednesday, I was unloading groceries from my car when Derek called. I nearly let it go to voicemail. I'd been letting things settle in me all week and hadn't felt ready for the disruption of his voice, but something made me answer. He was cheerful in the particular way that meant he wanted something. We talked about the weather in Atlanta, about Cynthia's mother's hip, about a restaurant they'd tried that had a 14-week wait list and whether that was reasonable or absurd. I listened and said the appropriate things. I was very good at this by now, the maintenance conversation, the performance of closeness with nothing underneath it. Then he said, "Actually, Mom, there's something I've been meaning to bring up." I put the last grocery bag on the counter and sat down at the kitchen table. "We're looking at a piece of commercial property," he said. "The numbers are good, but there's a cash flow gap in the acquisition phase, about $60,000. It's short-term, maybe 18 months, and we'd structure it as a proper loan with documentation this time. Cynthia's father is putting in 40, and we were hoping you might consider coming in for the rest." I looked at my hands flat on the table. "I saw the photo," I said. "Silence." "Which photo?" "The welcome home dinner," I said. "For your promotion, the one Cynthia posted." "Oh." A pause that he didn't fill. "I called you twice when you texted me about the promotion," I said. "I didn't hear back. Things have been really busy, Mom. The transition period is intense, and Cynthia had been planning that dinner for Derek," I said, and something in my voice made him stop. "When is the last time you invited me to something?" He was quiet for a moment. "We should plan something. I know we've been bad about that. It's just the timing with everything." "I'm not angry," I said. "I want you to know that. I'm not calling to fight. I'm just telling you that I saw the photo, and I understood something I'd been trying not to understand for a while. Mom, that dinner was last minute. It wasn't intentional. I thought about the white peonies, the coordinated neutrals, the draped sport coat in the empty chair that was the only seat at the table I could have occupied. "It's all right," I said. "I need to go put my groceries away. I'll talk to you soon." I ended the call before he could respond. He called back 20 minutes later. I didn't answer. He called twice more that evening. I sent him a text that said, "I'm fine. Just need some time to think. I'll be in touch." Then I put the phone on the charger in the kitchen and went to read in the bedroom with the door closed, something I hadn't done in years. I heard from Margaret 2 days later. The paperwork was drafted. She'd named Brianna as the new beneficiary, with a secondary provision directing a portion to a scholarship fund at the public library where I volunteered, specifically for adult women returning to complete their education. I'd added that part on a quiet impulse one Tuesday afternoon, watching a woman about 20 years younger than me work through a GED prep workbook at a corner table with a focus that made me think of my own mother. Margaret told me Derek would receive a formal notification as the removed beneficiary, as required. That notification arrived to him on a Friday morning. By 11 a.m., my phone had 7 missed calls, 2 from Derek, 3 from Cynthia, 1 from Derek's number again, and 1 from a number I didn't recognize. There was a voicemail from Derek that I played once standing at my kitchen counter. Mom, what is this? What did you do? You need to call me right now. This is not you need to call me. His voice had that tight, high quality of someone who has just received information that rearranges their understanding of their circumstances and hasn't yet decided how to frame it for public consumption. I deleted the voicemail. I had plans that day. I had promised Carol I'd help her pick out a new dining room table at the furniture store on 5th, which was a task that sounds small but with Carol requires a meaningful investment of time and strong opinions. I went. We spent 2 hours testing chairs and debating the merits of round versus rectangular, and I ate a sandwich from the cafe next door and felt, for long stretches, entirely like myself. When I got back to my car, I had 19 missed calls. I sat in the parking lot for a moment and thought about Raymond. Not the end of him, not the hospice weeks, but before an ordinary Sunday morning very early in our marriage, before Derek was born, when we'd driven out to the coast and eaten fried shrimp from a paper basket on a dock and talked about nothing in particular. He had a way of being quiet that never felt like absence. His silence was a kind of company. I had not found anyone since whose quiet felt like that, and I had stopped looking, but I thought about it sometimes. I drove home with the radio on. The calls had reached 31 by dinner time. Cynthia had sent a text that said, "Eleanor, this is completely irrational, and I'd like to speak with you at your earliest convenience." I found the use of my first name she had called me that exactly twice before, both times during arguments more clarifying than upsetting. It was useful information about how things actually stood. Derek sent a text that said, "I know we've had our distance, but I didn't think you would do something like this. Dad left that for our family." I read it twice, and then set the phone down. Raymond had not left it for our family. Raymond had left it to me because I was his wife, and because he trusted that I would know what to do with it. I had spent 23 years figuring out what that meant. I slept well that night, better than I had in months, truthfully, in the way that difficult decisions can suddenly free you from the weight of carrying them as possibilities. Derek appeared on my front porch on Saturday morning at 9:15. He had driven from Atlanta 4 hours, which told me several things about his state of mind. He was wearing a jacket despite the warmth, which he always did when he wanted to feel armored. He knocked 3 times, sharp. I opened the door and looked at my son. He was gray at the temples now in a way that still surprised me sometimes. He had Raymond's jaw and my father's eyes, and despite everything, the sight of him still did something complicated to my chest. I stepped aside and let him in. He went straight to the living room and sat on the edge of the sofa, the way people do when they're not planning to stay, when they want to signal that this is a crisis visit, not a social one. I sat across from him in the armchair and folded my hands in my lap. "You need to reverse this," he said. "I don't know what's going on with you, but this is not a reasonable response to feeling left out of a dinner." "It's not about a dinner," I said. "Then what is it about? Because from where I'm sitting it looks like you've decided to blow up our family because Cynthia posted a photo." "I'd like to ask you something," I said, "and I'd like you to answer me honestly. When you called me last week about the commercial property, was that the first time you'd considered asking me for money toward it?" He blinked. "What does that have to do with anything? Please just answer me." He was quiet for a moment. We'd talked about the possibility a few months ago, before the details were finalized. "A few months ago," I said. "So while the welcome home dinner was being planned, you were also planning to ask me for $60,000. His mouth opened, then closed. "I'm not saying the two things are connected," I said. "I'm asking you to tell me the truth about what our relationship is. Because from my side, it seems like what I am to you is an option you keep available. Someone you call when you need something smoothed over and set aside when you don't. That's not fair. I think it's accurate. I think you've been careful not to examine it, because examining it would require you to change something, and it's been easier not to." He leaned forward. "You're making a decision that affects your own financial future based on a feeling. I'm making a decision about my own assets based on 30 years of observation," I said. "There's a difference." He ran his hand over his face, and for a moment he looked very young and very tired, and I felt the complicated thing in my chest move again. But I stayed where I was. Cynthia's parents are going to know about this, he said. This affects the property deal. This is going to look like… Derek, I said, I am not part of that deal. I was never going to be part of that deal in the way you were imagining. So that's it? His voice had shifted, quieter now, which was more unnerving than the earlier edge of it. You're just done with me? I'm not done with you, I said. I love you. I'll love you for the rest of my life, whatever that looks like. But I've been a resource to you for a long time, a convenient one, and I'm choosing to stop arranging myself around that. He sat there for a moment. The room was quiet. Outside, I could hear a mockingbird going through its repertoire in the oak tree by the fence. I didn't mean for it to be that way, he said finally, and there was something in his voice that sounded less like strategy and more like the 19-year-old boy I'd helped move into his first dorm room and who'd cried in my arms in the parking lot before he made me leave. I know, I said, but it was. He left an hour later. Not warmly, not with resolution, but without the energy he'd arrived with. He didn't say he'd fight the beneficiary change. He didn't apologize. He said he needed to think, and I told him he could take all the time he needed. I meant it. Margaret called me the following Thursday. There had been some preliminary inquiries from Derek's attorney about the account and whether the designation change could be contested. Margaret explained the straightforward legal reality. It could not. The account was mine. The designation was mine to assign. There was no trust involved, no terms that required notice or agreement from the removed beneficiary. Derek had been listed there because I had listed him there, and I had unlisted him for the same reason. Because it was my name, and my choice, and my life. She also told me something else. In the course of her routine review of my full financial picture, something she does whenever I make a significant change, she'd found something I hadn't known about. The Chattanooga lease matter from 3 years ago, the one Cynthia's brother had quietly settled. The settlement had included a lien notation against my name that had never been formally removed from county records in Hamilton County. It was a clerical issue more than a legal one, but it would have come up if I'd tried to refinance my own home or opened a new line of credit. It had been sitting there for 3 years without anyone mentioning it to me. I sat with that for a long moment. Can we clear it? I asked. Already in process, Margaret said. Should be resolved in 6 to 8 weeks. I thanked her, and we said goodbye. And I sat at my kitchen table in the quiet, with the afternoon light coming in low and warm across the floor, and thought about how many things had been happening around me that I hadn't been told. I wasn't surprised. That was the part that sat heaviest. I wasn't surprised. I called Brianna that evening. I told her about the account, this time fully. I told her what I had done, and why, and what it meant for her and for Lily. She was so quiet for so long that I thought the call had dropped. Aunt Eleanor, she said finally, and her voice was careful with emotion in the way I recognized from her father, my brother David, who had the same quality of holding things steady, even when they weren't. You don't have to do this. I know, I said. That's what makes it mean something. She cried for a few minutes. Not dramatically, she was too much like David for that, just quietly. The sound of someone receiving something they hadn't known they'd been hoping for. I listened. I didn't rush her. When she'd settled, she told me Lily had come home from my house and immediately looked up every species of bird found in central Tennessee and started a list. She'd identified 17 on my back porch alone, apparently, and had made me a note that Brianna had forgotten to pass along, which she read to me now. Dear Aunt Eleanor, I saw an eastern towhee in your azaleas. They are rare. You are lucky. I laughed in a way I hadn't laughed in months, and kept laughing after we hung up, alone in my kitchen, in the good light. The legal notice from Derek's attorney arrived 10 days later, a formal letter outlining their position, which was that the account change had been made under emotional duress and without proper consideration of established family expectations. Margaret responded on my behalf with a document that was 4 pages of polite legal language that meant, essentially, this account belonged to Eleanor Marsh. The designation was lawfully changed at her sole discretion, and there was no further conversation to be had on this subject. I never read their letter. Margaret described it to me, and I told her to do whatever was necessary and to bill me accordingly. I put the unopened envelope in the recycling bin on my way out to the garden. It was a cool morning, the kind of early autumn morning when the air is dry enough to feel like a gift. The azaleas had finally been cut back. I'd done it myself the previous weekend, a little late in the season, but not impossibly so. The bird feeder was full. Lily had sent me a hand-drawn chart of bird species with a star next to eastern towhee, mailed in an envelope with a bluebird sticker on the back. I knelt beside the rose beds and worked the soil loose with my hands. I thought about love, what it is and what it isn't, and how easy it is to confuse the two when you've built your life around the care of someone who needed it. I had loved Derek since before I knew his face, from the first morning I was sick, and certain something had changed in me permanently. That love hadn't gone anywhere. It lived in me the way all long loves do, as part of the structure of who I was, not something I could remove even if I'd wanted to. But love, I had finally understood, was not the same as availability. It was not the same as access. It was not the same as a position at the table that other people could assign or withhold based on the image they were trying to project. I had given a great deal to a great many people in my 63 years. Some of that had come back to me in the form of a niece who drove 6 hours without being asked. Some of it had come back in a child's handwritten bird chart with a bluebird sticker. Some of it had not come back at all, and that was a truth I was learning to hold without it hollowing me out. I stood, brushed the soil from my knees, and went inside to make coffee. There was a book I'd been meaning to start for 3 weeks, a thick novel Carol had pressed on me with the confidence of someone who knew exactly what you needed before you did. I made my coffee, went to the back porch, and opened it to the first page. The mockingbird was at it again in the oak tree, cycling through its borrowed songs. It had at least 5 different birds in its repertoire that morning, maybe more. I listened and read and let the sun move slowly across the porch boards. If you've ever had to let someone go, not because you stopped loving them, but because you finally remembered you were someone too, I hope you know that is not a failure. That is not hardness. That is not an ending, even when it feels like one. I'll be reading your stories. Every single one.